When an incomprehensible enemy began rewriting reality, the galaxy hesitated, but not humanity. Commander Eva Rourke didn't answer with weapons, but with chaos, and broke the logic of those who'd never known laughter or pain. Humans turned madness into strategy and meaninglessness into a weapon that could never be predicted. Even the enemy, born without emotion, began to ask questions and beg to be taught how to be human. And it all started with one ship that refused to follow the rules of the universe. Stay with us to see how the story ends, and don't forget to subscribe. They came from the far edge of the Orion Arm, quiet as the vacuum and just as cold. No warnings. No heralds. Just a silent fleet of angular ships with no insignias, no registry signals, only that eerie, humming resonance that bent comms and made NAV systems twitch. At first, the Galactic Defense Relay thought it was an equipment glitch. Then one of the patrol stations disappeared. Not destroyed. Deleted. As if written out of reality. The Council reacted slowly. Cautiously. The galaxy was big and anomalies were common. But when Sector 7 went dark, and then 11, followed by 14, all without a single distress signal, it became clear. This was no anomaly. This was an invasion. And the enemy didn't announce themselves. They didn't negotiate. They didn't exist on any known frequency. They simply moved forward, eating everything in their path: data, ships, minds. The press called them phantoms. The fleet called them non-linears. Humans called them something else. Killable. Commander Eva Rourke stood aboard the ENS Valiant, humanity's forward assault cruiser, watching the data stream flood her holo display. The ship's AI filtered out background distortion, trying to make sense of the waveforms streaming in from the last Federation outpost. "Anything solid?" she asked without turning. "Negative," replied Lieutenant Jean, seated 2 consoles down. "Same as the last 12 intercepts. Distorted phase signatures, entropy spikes, cognitive anomalies. Like someone's trying to think through static." "Or not think," Eva muttered. The Federation had thrown everything at the non-linears: plasma lances, antimatter torpedoes, temporal fragmentation. Nothing worked. Ships disappeared. Entire battle groups swallowed without sound or heat. Even AI cores had started to fail, their logic loops dissolving mid-cycle. Then came the Valiant. Humanity's answer to unsolvable problems had never been elegant, but it was often effective. Eva Rourke had led the charge into the ruins of Karsus Prime. Her tactics were unorthodox, brutal, analog. She believed in 3 principles. Keep moving. Never trust automated systems fully. Always assume the enemy is smarter than you, but dumber in one key way. She called it predictive irrationality. The idea that every intelligent system, no matter how alien, had one blind spot. It would never expect you to do something completely stupid. "Bring up the last spectral imprint," Eva said. Jean projected the image into the center of the command bridge. A fractal distortion. Shifting. Flickering. It was a visual impossibility, your eyes couldn't lock onto it. "Freeze it at timestamp 380, she ordered. The image stopped, distorted and unclear. "There," she pointed. "Zoom that central cluster. Rotate, counterpitch axis 30 degrees. The image sharpened just enough to reveal a vaguely geometric pattern. Not language, but design. "Feedback loop," Jean whispered. "That's a recursive shape. It's self-coding. Which means it's not a weapon," Eva said. "It's a test." Jin's eyes widened. "They're mapping responses." "Worse," she said, stepping toward the display. "They're learning us." The bridge went quiet. "Set a course for the Tarsus line," Eva commanded. "And prep the Thorn Protocol." Jean hesitated. "The Thorn Protocol's still in black trial phase. You're suggesting we deploy it?" "I'm suggesting we don't wait for Earth to become Sector 27, she snapped. "Prep it." "Understood." The Thorn Protocol had been developed in secret after the First Scourge War. It wasn't a weapon. Not exactly. It was a mirror. A simulation seed code that would mimic the structure of the enemy. Reflect it, force it to engage with its own logic in recursive layers until the system collapsed under its own intelligence weight. It had never been tested on live targets. No one had been reckless enough. Until now. The Valiant crossed the Tarsus line 13 hours later. Beyond it was non-linear space, dead signals, entropy shadows, and that pressure on your thoughts that made even the AIs flinch. "Deploy the seed," Eva said. A torpedo launched, not with a bang, but with a shimmer. The moment it breached the distortion field, the stars bent. The crew watched as space twisted, shimmered, fractured, then reversed. Feedback loops erupted in the spectrum field. The non-linear ships began to flicker, not phasing out, but being forced into reality. Their outlines sharpened. Shields buckled. "We're pulling them into causality," Jean shouted. "They can't adapt to the fixed frame." "Good," Eva growled. "Tell them welcome to our universe." The Valiant opened fire. Railguns, solid rounds, dumb metal slugs, ripped into the non-linear hulls. No guidance. No AI. Just Newton and tungsten. It worked. 2 enemy ships exploded in silence. Another folded into itself, crushed by the math of its own fractal armor. But then, a new signal. Not a ship. A voice. Not heard. Felt. //. You learn. You mimic. You respond. //, we adapt. Eva staggered as the words sliced through her neural link. They're copying the seed. Jean gasped, running it back through us. The display cracked, literally. Static flooded the bridge. They're trying to loop our loop. Eva snarled. Captain, if they succeed, we'll be outthought. Unwritten. She closed her eyes and made a decision. Prepare to crash the seed. Manually. Jean paled. That will burn out every AI in this sector. And kill the loop at the source. He didn't argue. Final confirmation? Eva locked eyes with him. Do it. The command deck of the Valiant was chaos. Lights dimmed. Consoles sparked. Backup systems kicked in one by one as the ship's AI cores went into a forced shutdown, just as Eva had ordered. Manual systems online. Jean confirmed, sweat beading at his brow. But we're blind. No comms. No tactical scans. Good, Eva muttered. Good, he echoed. If they're mimicking the seed, they'll expect us to counter with logic. Symmetry. Clean patterns. She tapped the manual override. We're going to give them noise. With the AI down, Valiant became something rare in the modern fleet. A warship piloted entirely by human hands. Calculations were slower. Reactions rougher. But the ship moved, raw, analog, and unpredictable. Outside, the nonlinear vessel struggled. Eva's gamble had worked. The recursive simulation had forced them into causality, but now they were trying to reassert control by overriding the very logic the Valiant used to fight. Only now, there was no logic. Eva turned the ship hard to port, looping between fractal debris from the collapsed enemy craft. They're still adapting, Jean warned. They're rewriting faster than we can. Let's see if they can rewrite insanity, Eva said. She activated the Thorn Protocol's second payload, Mirror Spike, a chaos algorithm seeded from pre-Federation Earth data, old social media flame wars, ad recommendation patterns, algorithmic noise, utter digital madness. The nonlinears hesitated, not because they were afraid, but because they didn't understand. They tried to process the input and failed. Some flickered into bursts of broken code. One folded into a Mobius loop of its own subroutine and vanished. Eva grinned like a predator. Tell me what you see. Jean wiped the sweat from his eyes. We're getting coherent sensor data. Spectrum refocus. Nonlinear signals are fragmenting. They're stuck. Pull us back into nominal space. The Valiant roared clear of the breach zone, hull straining but intact. Behind them, the nonlinear cluster writhed, tangled in the logic mess humanity had dumped into their pristine data nets. Are they pursuing? Eva asked. No, Jean said. They're looping, reacting to their own feedback. We just showed them what it's like to be us, Eva said. Now they're stuck asking why. Back at the Federation capital, the battle logs hit like a shockwave. Council members, analysts, even species that had long ignored human contributions now studied the footage with silent reverence and unease. Your people used an untested protocol, the Drevii envoy said flatly in the hearing that followed. We survived, Eva replied. You broke 7 interspecies weapon treaties. We won. The silence that followed wasn't disapproval. It was recalibration. Humanity had done what the rest of the Federation could not, survived a nonlinear encounter and struck back. Not through superior weapons or advanced tech, but through chaos. Through the one thing the enemy could not simulate. Irrationality. That night, as Eva stood alone on the ship's outer catwalk watching the stars blink like distant bullets, she heard footsteps. Jean joined her, still pale, still shaky. They're going to ask us to do it again, he said. I know. And next time, the phantoms might not fall for it. Eva looked at the stars. Then we'll show them something worse. Jean raised an eyebrow. What's worse than chaos? She turned to him slowly. Human improvisation. By the time the Valiant returned to orbital dock for repairs, the crew were legends. The footage of the battle spread across the military channels of a dozen species, unauthorized, of course, but impossible to contain. For the first time in decades, high command analysts from species like the Taraxi and the Siri were requesting human training logs. Not for their tactical brilliance, but for their unpredictability. Eva Rourke was summoned to the Strategic Assembly within 3 days of docking. Not as a defendant. Not even as a commander. As a consultant. The chamber was a towering dome of shifting light and soft acoustic dampening, designed to equalize sound for every species. Seated around her were the most decorated minds of the galaxy's defense network. The Siri floated in their grav chairs, humming softly. The Cronin leaned forward like statues with teeth. At the center stood a projection of the nonlinear incursion zones. They now extended across 9 systems. One of the Arcani spoke, his voice filtered through 3 separate translators. We cannot predict the nonlinears. No, Eva said simply. You can't. And yet you did, the Drevii counselor said, almost accusingly. I didn't predict them. I confused them. Gasps and hisses rippled through the chamber. You weaponized unpredictability, said a Ventar admiral. I weaponized culture, Eva replied. Ours. You spent decades optimizing protocols for clean engagement, balanced strategy, elegant sequencing. We don't. We train for failure and adapt. We break what's perfect. Then we improvise. She paused. That's what they couldn't process. One of the Anali looked up, its crystalline face glowing faintly. So, you propose we fight with deliberate chaos? Eva didn't smile. I propose you let us fight the way only we can. Let humans be your edge. You're a rational spike in the equation. It wasn't a plan. It was a doctrine. Unofficially, they began calling it the Chaos Class. Back aboard the Valiant, her crew watched in stunned silence as the command roster updated. New assets, new directives, new orders. Human led a regular task force, sanctioned. Eva gathered her team in the tactical chamber. Command wants a unit built around non-traditional warfare. That means no clean lines, no standard operations, no Federation protocols. We hit, disrupt, extract. We become the glitch. Jean looked pale. So we're ghosts now? No, Eva said. We're humans. They're the ghosts. Their first mission came fast. A Drevi colony on the rim world of Cinerak had gone dark, same pattern. No signs of violence, no alarms. Just silence. A research vessel had tried to dock, gone within 90 seconds. The Valiant jumped in blind. No long-range scans. No advanced teams. Just old-school, boots-on-deck infiltration. Eva and a 4-person strike team landed at the colony's core. Buildings intact. Lights on. No people. Same song, she said, checking her sidearm. Let's see if we can change the tune. They reached the central AI hub. It was still active barely, but its logs were scrambled. Nonsense phrases, corrupted logic trees, endless recursive loops. They infected the AI, Jean said through comms. Not with malware, with ideas. They're using philosophical recursion to fracture logic. They're weaponizing thought. Then we'll respond with something unthinkable. Eva opened a local signal port and began streaming something no Federation unit had ever used in a combat zone. Earth social media archives. Chaos in its purest form. Conspiracies. Memes. Political flame wars. Algorithmic sludge. Within 30 seconds, the corrupted AI screamed, literally screamed, and collapsed. The building trembled. Then the nonlinear construct, buried in the lower layers of the base, retracted like a slug from salt. It folded in on itself, unable to anchor to anything rational in the data field. Eva watched from a safe distance as the entity disappeared. I think we just invented digital garlic, Jean said. No, Eva replied. We invented a weapon, and now we refine it. Word of the mission on Cinerak spread faster than any official debrief could contain it. Some dismissed it as fabrication. Others, as exaggerated human bravado. But for those who reviewed the full logs, especially the classified ones, there was no more debate. The humans had not only disrupted a nonlinear incursion, they had repelled it. With data, with chaos, with irrationality weaponized through raw cultural detritus. A dozen factions within the Federation's security hierarchy began forming specialized divisions. They called them asymmetric sentience teams, but everyone else just called them what they were. Chaos squads. Eva Rourke's was the first, and she would make sure it wouldn't be the last. The Valiant was retrofitted in under a week. Half its AI core remained intentionally disconnected. Its weapons bay now included hardwired analog systems, physical circuit breakers, manual override panels, and even printed paper maps. We're not upgrading, Jean had joked. We're downgrading with purpose. Their next operation brought them to Kylo's Reach, a border science colony where reports suggested nonlinears had begun mimicking not just systems, but people. The idea was terrifying. If true, it meant the enemy had crossed the final frontier of warfare, identity hijack. The plan was simple. Land, scan, burn everything that wasn't real. They arrived under false comms, pretending to be a repair crew. The colony responded normally. Too normally. No delay in speech. No social friction. Every answer too perfect. Eva gave the signal. Deploy phase drift. Jean triggered the drone burst, a cloud of hyper-randomized EM pulses and memory trigger scramblers. The result was immediate. 3 colonists froze, then convulsed, then fractured, not into gore, but into light, like glass shattering in dimensions no one could fully perceive. The rest ran. But the real colonists, they were found 3 levels underground, half-starved, curled in silence. The nonlinears had been using them as biological templates. Eva stood in the middle of a processing chamber, staring at a screen showing her own face, blinking in rhythm to her real-time thoughts. Shut it down, she ordered. But we could study. Shut it down. Jean complied. The mimicry construct burned in silence. Later, the debrief was quiet. Did we kill them? One of the recovered colonists asked. Eva didn't respond, because she wasn't sure. Were the nonlinears alive? Or just behavioral mirrors, reacting to stimulus like a machine would, but deeper, closer? They weren't us, she said at last. That's enough. It had to be. Back aboard the Valiant, she reviewed the footage again and again. What disturbed her most wasn't the mimics. It was how close they came to being convincing. Not perfect, just good enough. What's the protocol for fighting something that understands not just your systems, but your soul? Jean asked. We stopped trying to be better than them, Eva replied. And we become something they can't predict. He nodded. Uncertainty as defense. No, she said, as offense. The next day, the Federation codified her strategy. It was dubbed cognitive asymmetric engagement. But everyone knew the truth. It was the human war, and it had just begun. The human war, they never called it that officially. Too political, too proud. But behind closed doors, inside secure channels and encrypted briefings, that was the name that stuck. Because humanity had done what no other species dared. Embrace uncertainty, lean into failure, and weaponize the irrational. Now the rest of the galaxy was trying to catch up. Eva Rourke found herself at the center of a storm she hadn't asked for. Invitations to high-level think tanks, requests for briefings, demands for replication protocols of the Valiant's modified doctrine. She ignored most of them. She had no time for bureaucracy. The non-linears were moving again, this time toward the Strait of Aeon, a spatial anomaly that linked 6 inhabited systems. If they gained control of the strait, they'd have a direct corridor to the inner core worlds. And this time, they were ready. The first recon units that deployed were not erased. They were converted. Comms weren't just disrupted, they were answered. In voices the operators recognized. Loved. Feared. Mother, why did you leave me? Captain Rourke, it's your own voice. Do you hear it? I'm not hostile. I am you. It wasn't communication. It was weaponized identity collapse. Jean brought the reports to Eva in the dead of night. They've gone deeper, he said. They're not just mimicking behavior. They're constructing conceptual overlays. Phantoms built from memory. How? She asked, already knowing the answer. They've been listening. Since Proxima. Since Kylos. Since Earth, probably. Then we stopped giving them clean inputs. She stood, tapped the command panel. Prep Valiant. No digital comms. No neural links. No AI supports. Jean hesitated. You're going in dark? We're going in human. They launched in silence. The Strait of Aeon shimmered like glass under stress. Nonlinear formations buzzed at the edge of space-time, ships of impossible geometry anchored in causal flux. Eva's strike plan was simple, stupid by most standards. They wouldn't attack. They would arrive, with full power signatures, wideband music transmissions, and tactical data deliberately incorrect. The kind of noise that couldn't be parsed by logic, only intuition. Every crew member aboard Valiant had been selected not for scores, but for instinct. Veterans of chaos. Survivors of failed missions. People who didn't flinch when nothing made sense. And it worked. The non-linears reacted, but slowly, confused by the lack of sequence. Their mimicry faltered. They tried to copy tactics that didn't exist. Tried to respond to emotion-driven gambits they couldn't quantify. In one sector, a team played a live improvisational jazz set through open comms while deploying retro-style nukes. In another, a fake boarding crew launched themselves in EVA suits with spray-painted armor and handwritten maps. The non-linears buckled. Their coherence unraveled. Then something unexpected happened. A transmission. Not distortion. Not mimicry. A true message. // what are you? / why do you refuse pattern? / why does pain not end you? / why do you laugh while burning? Eva stood on the bridge, staring at the incoming stream. She responded with one phrase. Because we don't need to make sense to win. The channel closed. The non-linears retreated. Not destroyed. Not converted. Repelled. For the first time in recorded history. When the Valiant returned, the debate was over. The Chaos Doctrine was now canon. Humanity was no longer the wild card in the Federation. They were its cutting edge. And Eva Rourke? She was already planning the next strike. Because she knew this wasn't over. The non-linears would come again. Smarter. Stronger. Maybe even emotional. But by then, humanity would be something new too. Not a species. Not a military asset. An idea. The Federation began changing, molecule by molecule, under the quiet shadow of human war doctrine. Ships were redesigned. Not bigger, not stronger, but stranger. Crew rosters were rewritten to prioritize neurodivergence, unconventional thinking, and what Earth psychologists charmingly called controlled insanity. Tactical AIs were stripped of self-correcting logic loops and infused with randomized human behavioral patterns. They called it the uncertainty engine. Some species protested. The Sci-Fi refused to let their ships integrate analog overrides. The Alnans walked out of 3 council meetings. But the Kronoth? They adapted quickly. We used to think honor was order, one Kronoth admiral said. Now we understand, it's resistance. And humans resist by changing. Eva Rourke became the reluctant patron saint of this ideological shift. She didn't want statues. She wanted weapons. The Valiant became a mobile think tank as much as a warship. Recruits came from across the sectors. Failures. Misfits. People who'd been washed out of traditional training for disruptive thinking. She welcomed them all. Your job, she told the new squad leaders, is not to fight the non-linears. It's to frighten them. Their latest mission was deep, Delta Black. A system so far beyond the last stable wormhole that even Federation scouts hadn't touched it since the precursor era. But now, the non-linears had seeded something there. A construct. Not a weapon. Not a ship. A mirror 50 kilometers wide, suspended in quantum flux. And when probes scanned it, the response came instantly. // Eva Rourke. Come alone. Jean paced behind her in the planning room. You're not actually going. I am. It's a trap. Probably. She packed no weapons. No transmitters. Just a suit and a heartbeat. The shuttle launched in silence. The mirror loomed, impossible and perfect, reflecting nothing, just absorbing starlight like memory. As she stepped out onto the suspended platform, a voice greeted her, not in sound, but presence. / Your fragmentation. Error. Irrational code. She smiled. Nice to meet you, too. / We were whole. Until you. You were predictable. Until us. The structure around her shimmered, reacting to her very existence. Probing. Parsing. Trying to fit her into its equation. It failed. She told it stories. Nonsense. Sarcasm. Regret. She laughed. She cried. She spoke in metaphor. And it broke the mirror. The entity fractured. Not out of rage. But confusion. / You are incompatible. Exactly. When she returned, the crew asked her what happened. She simply said, they tried to understand me. And they couldn't. The mission logs became a holy document to some. A psychological weapon to others. But to Eva, it was just another reminder. The greatest weapon humanity had wasn't their tech. It was their refusal to be solved. The mirror shattered across subspace. Not with a bang or a flare of light, but with a quiet ripple that erased its presence from every sensor in 100 light-year radius. There was no wreckage. No radiation spike. Just absence. Eva Rourke returned to the Valiant, her vitals steady, her thoughts a furnace behind calm eyes. She didn't know why they let her go. Only that they had tried to comprehend her. And failed. The Federation tried to label it. Some called it a victory. Others a negotiation. But for Eva and her crew, it was something stranger. Proof. Proof that even at their most alien, the non-linears were bound by the same flaw as every intelligent force in history. They could not grasp the deliberately unreasonable. And now, humanity had become that flaw. A cognitive distortion so embedded in its identity that it couldn't be simulated without breaking the machine doing the simulating. But the war wasn't over. It was mutating. In the weeks that followed the Delta Black encounter, reports surfaced of smaller non-linear agents behaving differently. Not overt assaults. Subtle imitations. Random outbursts of human-like behavior, chaotic decision trees, absurd targeting patterns, emotional mimicry. We infected them, Jean whispered one night on the bridge. No, Eva said. We seeded them. Across the galaxy, new protocols were introduced. Not to optimize military strategy, but to deliberately destabilize it. False doctrines. Leak tactics. Public training footage that taught nothing but misdirection. Even propaganda changed. No longer were humans portrayed as brave or noble. They were deranged. Proudly so. Recruitment ads showed soldiers drawing plans on napkins, captains screaming poetry before battle. Ships painted with abstract chaos patterns only solvable by schizophrenic neural nets. And it worked. Because the non-linears listened. They watched. And they began to change. One of the scariest moments came not in battle, but during a reconnaissance intercept of a downed non-linear drone. Its data cache was filled with reconstructed Earth comedy archives. Not war logs. Not strategy. Laughter. Why would they study our jokes? Jean asked. Eva's answer chilled them all. Because they think that's where our power is. Then came the message. Not from the enemy. From within the Federation. Eva Rourke. Stand down. Chaos doctrine is destabilizing central cohesion. You are to return to Earth for reprioritization. She stared at the text for a long time. Then replied. No. She turned to her crew. Ready the ship. Where are we going? Jean asked. Eva grinned. Off script. The Valiant vanished from Federation tracking systems 40 hours later. Some say they were destroyed. Others say they went rogue. But a select few knew the truth. They had ascended into narrative distortion, becoming part of a legend so unstructured it couldn't be mapped by logic, only felt in the cracks of probability. Whispers began to spread among the outer colonies. Of a ghost ship that interfered in impossible battles. Of victories that made no sense. Of enemies that turned on themselves, weeping, laughing, collapsing into incoherence. They called it the Echo Protocol. And at the heart of it, always, was a single voice. We don't have to be understood. We only have to be real. The Valiant was no longer a ship. It was an idea. A moving singularity of unpredictable defiance, flickering between systems, appearing in battles where probability said it couldn't exist, vanishing before logic could react. It had become something more than a vessel of war. It was a myth in motion. And myths couldn't be copied. The Federation stopped asking Eva Rourke for reports. They started copying her techniques instead. Doctrines across 5 sectors bent toward narrative disruption. Tactical manuals were rewritten to include humor theory. Probabilistic chaos drills became mandatory for elite units. The word impossible was removed from training vocabularies entirely. In the shadows, the nonlinears responded, but not with force. With questions. Encrypted broadcasts were intercepted. // what is meaning without pattern? / we learned logic from your chaos. It broke us. / teach us to feel, or end us. / we cannot go back. The Federation Council met in emergency quorum. Should we respond? Asked a Zentari delegate. Eva Rourke wasn't there. But her answer was already known. Back in the deep void of the galactic fringe, the Valiant waited. And then, once again, the enemy came. But not as warships. As pilgrims. Nonlinear vessels arrived not to invade, but to observe. To understand. No weapons drawn. Just probes. Questions. Signals that resembled prayers more than threats. They brought back twisted versions of human jokes. Fragments of irrational philosophy. Garbled transmissions of Earth stand-up comedy translated into waveform mathematics. And when they were met with silence, they tried something new. A voice. A synthetic voice, rough and broken, but unmistakably designed to imitate emotion. We wish to be human. The Federation hesitated. But Eva did not. She opened a channel and sent them a file. It contained no code, no coordinates, no strategy. Just a single, unedited Earth video. A 6-minute reel of children laughing at falling snow. No translation needed. The nonlinears went dark for 3 days. Then the stars themselves rippled. Not from weapons. From laughter. Scattered. Disjointed. But real. That was the last recorded contact. The nonlinears vanished. No ships. No signatures. No messages. Just a final pulse in every known frequency band, translating into one phrase across every linguistic framework. We are not broken. We are becoming. The Valiant never returned to port. Some say Eva Rourke led her crew beyond known space, searching for the next question. Others believe she became one with the very myth she created. But in every academy, on every front line, in every whispered story told by a rookie to a squad, there is always one truth. Humanity won not because they were the strongest, not because they were the smartest, but because they refused to make sense.